Welcome to Evidence Mastery with Dr. Massoud Toussi. Today, we are going to learn about the 2026 FDA guidance on post-approval pregnancy safety studies. Let's jump right in. Think of today's session as a bit of a high-end masterclass. We're going to decode exactly how we use real-world evidence to protect one of our absolute most vulnerable populations, pregnant women and their babies. But how do we actually do that safely? As pharmacoepidemiologists, regulators, or even healthcare professionals, it is literally our duty to understand how these advanced methodologies are applied out there in the real world to ensure patient safety.
Here's our quick syllabus for today's explainer. First, the pregnancy data gap. Second, case reports and series. Third, designing pregnancy registries. Fourth, complementary electronic health data. And finally, number 5, evidence mastery and applications.
All right, Section 1, the pregnancy data gap. We really have to start by understanding the massive public health challenge that makes post-marketing research absolutely undeniably essential.
The sheer scale of this, it's staggering. We aren't just talking about some small niche group here. Based on 2025 national vital statistics, we're looking at roughly 3.6 million births every single year, and that's just in the United States alone. To put that into perspective, that's 3.6 million pregnancies where acute or chronic medical conditions, think things like diabetes or asthma, might require treatment, or where brand new therapeutics and vaccines might be administered.
And here's another huge layer of complexity. Over 40% of pregnancies, 41.6% to be exact, are completely unintended. So what does this actually mean for us? It means potential inadvertent early drug exposure is a massive everyday reality. Women could easily be taking medications well before they even realize they're pregnant. We absolutely have to monitor this.
So, this brings us to a really critical question. Why is post-marketing data our primary safety net? I mean, why can't we just rely on clinical trials for pregnant populations exactly like we do for everyone else?
Well, the answer is that pregnant women are historically and actively excluded from clinical trials. It's done to protect fetuses from potentially harmful exposures. Which makes sense, right? If a pregnancy happens during a trial, treatment is almost always just discontinued. But this creates a massive shift. The entire burden of safety risk assessment falls right onto post-approval real-world use. So as pharmacoepidemiologists, we're suddenly on the hook to track drug half-lives and their impacts across 3 very distinct maternal time periods: exposure prior to pregnancy, exposure during the actual pregnancy course, and postpartum monitoring, which of course includes lactation.
Let's move on and see how this builds our safety framework. Section 2, Case Reports and Series. This is really our first fundamental epidemiological tool used out in the real world.
Spontaneous adverse event reports are so often our very first signal. Frontline clinicians are just incredibly important here. They're usually the ones who catch rare congenital malformations early, simply by detecting those distinctive and unique patterns associated with particular pregnancy exposures. And here's the catch, an anecdotal report just isn't enough on its own.
To transform a simple anecdotal case report into high-quality pharmacovigilance data, we need some rigorous structure. Step 1, we absolutely must detail the specific adverse fetal, infant, and maternal outcomes. Step 2, we've got to establish the precise exposure timing in relation to gestational age. And yes, that includes the dose, the frequency, and the duration. And finally, Step 3, to rule out any background factors, we document genetics, family medical history, and other environmental exposures, the whole shebang.
Which naturally leads us right into our next pillar. Section 3, Designing Pregnancy Registries. Now this is the core methodology of primary real-world data collection.
In the clinical world, whenever we design a prospective pregnancy registry, the main target on our radar is major congenital malformations, or MCMs. Now, the strict clinical definition of an MCM is an abnormality in structural development that is medically significant, present at birth, and persists into postnatal life unless it's repaired. Most pregnancy registries are specifically designed and statistically powered primarily to assess this one overall risk.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the fascinating contrast we see when we look at registry data. On the one hand, their strengths are just incredible. Prospective enrollment means we capture accurate gestational timing and highly detailed covariates way before the pregnancy outcome is even known, which practically eliminates recall bias. But on the other hand, the limitations are pretty daunting. The operational hurdles include massive patient and provider recruitment challenges, which often result in small sample sizes. And, inevitably, you get lost to follow-up.
To combat these hurdles, the FDA recommends some absolutely essential registry design considerations to ensure rigorous, unbiased safety signal detection. First, we must prospectively enroll unexposed comparator cohorts, ideally pulled from the exact same disease population. We also require blinded adjudication of outcomes, usually by clinical geneticists or dysmorphologists. We have to meticulously detail gestational exposure timing and rigorously control for confounding by indication. And crucially, we must plan for robust patient and provider retention from day one. You really can't just wing that part.
Because single registries so often struggle with those small sample sizes we just talked about, we have to look elsewhere to solve the limitation. That brings us to Section 4, complementary electronic health data.
So how do we actually leverage these secondary sources? Well, it's a bit of a balancing act. Medical claims give us massive sample sizes and really reliable delivery codes. But the major challenge? Potential misclassification of exposure, plus they kind of lack clinical depth. Then you have electronic health records, which provide excellent clinical detail, think ultrasound and lab data, but it's super hard to confirm if a prescribed medication was actually taken by the patient. Finally, birth defect registries give us this beautifully adjudicated malformation data, but they very often completely miss early pregnancy loss. We have to evaluate and synthesize all these sources to get the complete picture.
Executing a valid complementary cohort study using these electronic data sources basically requires running a methodological gauntlet. We're talking about validating algorithms to identify both live and non-live births just to avoid live birth bias. We have to accurately estimate gestational age so we can calculate those vital trimester-specific exposure windows. We must establish rock-solid mother-infant linkages, usually via unique IDs or birth certificates, and we have to use gold standards, like medical chart reviews, for outcome validation, all while expertly adjusting for time-varying covariates. Yeah, it is complex, but it's absolutely necessary.
All right, let's move to our final section and tie all these methodologies together into one cohesive regulatory science framework. Section 5. Evidence, mastery, and applications. I want to state this very firmly. No single method works alone. True mastery of real-world evidence requires blending these approaches like a giant puzzle. To characterize the true safety of a medication during pregnancy, we absolutely must integrate the high-precision clinical detail of prospective pregnancy registries, the massive statistical power of complementary electronic health data, and those crucial early warning signals from clinical case series. This is the framework we use to protect patients and properly inform healthcare providers. I hope you enjoyed this explainer. If you are interested in similar topics, do not hesitate to subscribe to my channel. If you want to learn more about the advanced methods and applications of real-world evidence, I am writing a book called Real-World Evidence, Methods and Mastery, which will be published in 2027. Stay tuned. Until then, ask yourself, as new therapeutics evolve faster than ever, is your current real-world data strategy robust enough to protect our absolute most vulnerable patients?